Howdy, my name is Ted Campbell. This is a continuation of a brief video history of the area of Dallas, Texas that is now the three neighborhoods called Forest Meadow, Moss Farm, and Town Creek. The previous video introduced the Houcks family, who were the original settlers on the land that would become these three neighborhoods. It also described the coming of the railroads to this area from 1873 and the changes that the railroads brought about. I've produced a longer video called Houcksland, giving a more detailed history of this area. Through the early 20th century, the area that is now Forest Meadow, Town Creek, and Moss Farm became more and more a part of the growing Dallas area. In 1916, the road that is now North Greenville Avenue was designated as Texas State Highway 6, and it extended from the Dallas area north to the Red River. It was also called the Richardson Road in that period. In 1924, the Restland Memorial Park was developed on the old John Floyd property, retaining the Floyd family cemetery there as the Pioneer Cemetery. 2 years later, in 1926, Greenville Avenue was redesignated as U.S. Highway 75, and it remained so until North Central Expressway was constructed in the 1950s. Old photographs show motels along Greenville Avenue in our area. The road that is now Forest Lane had earlier been a property boundary. It was the northern boundary of the Houcks Upper Tract. Maps and plats from the early 20th century show this road, sometimes identified as the Garland and Grapevine Road. Dallas County has an extensive collection of aerial photographs that show this area in 1942, 1950, 1964, and 1978. The following sequence of photographs of the corner of Greenville Avenue and Forest Lane shows that the area was primarily rural through the early 1960s. Here's the corner in 1942, and then in 1950. Here's 1964, and here it is in 1978, looking a lot more like it is today. But although this area remained rural through the 1960s, it was not unusual for people who worked in the cities to have suburban farms, that is, homes and acreage in the vicinity of the city where they could carry on a semblance of rural life. One example of a suburban farm in our area was the homestead of the Bill Brown family, whose land is now part of Forest Meadow. W.A. Bill Brown had come to Texas as a young man in 1919 and developed oil fields both in East Texas and in West Texas. In 1942, he and his wife purchased a 25-acre farm on Forest Lane, part of the old Houcks Upper Tract. A 25-acre farm would probably not have been used to produce grain or cotton. Like other smaller suburban farms, I would guess that it had a barn with a cow for fresh milk, maybe a horse or two for pleasure riding, perhaps a chicken coop for fresh eggs, and a vegetable plot. A much more substantial suburban farm was built by one of the most colorful residents of this area in the mid-20th century. Harry S. Moss was born in 1888 in Ontario, Canada. He moved to Texas around 1906 and became involved in the Texas oil industry from its earliest years, forming the Moss Petroleum Company around 1920. He and his family resided on Armstrong Parkway in Highland Park, but in the 1930s he bought a Hereford bull at the Texas State Fair. Then he realized he had no place to keep it. So he purchased a stable and adjacent lands in Dallas County, eventually developing a 400-acre farm that came to be known as the Moss Haven Stock Farm. Although it was a working stock farm, the farm also served as a weekend and holiday residence for the Moss family. The Moss home was called Moss Haven and was built onto an earlier and simple house that may have been the home of a pioneer settler named Andrew Sloan Jackson. The house was extensively renovated by the Moss family and was featured in a 1958 issue of Architectural Digest. The Moss Haven home is located just behind Moss Haven Elementary School. A large part of the Moss Haven stock farm, including the old Moss farmhouse, would later become the Moss Farm neighborhood, but a substantial 250-acre portion was donated to the city of Dallas and is now the Harry S. Moss Park. This area underwent a further transformation following World War II when it became a fully suburban part of the Dallas urban area. Suburban life was built around mobility by way of the automobile, and freeways were essential to the building of the suburbs. North Central Expressway was the Dallas area's first freeway. It generally followed the route of the old H&TC rail line, but was laid out just west of the rail line. The first section of North Central Expressway was opened in 1950, but it was not completed from downtown Dallas even as far as Mockingbird Lane until 1952. Between then and 1956, the freeway was extended to Campbell Road in Richardson. In the same year, 1956, Texas Instruments opened its first buildings on its new Richardson campus. By the 1960s, construction was underway on the LBJ Freeway, and in January 1969, the stretch of the freeway between U.S. Highway 75 and Mesquite was opened. It was during this period, when the freeways were being built and the suburbs were expanding, that this area was incorporated into the city of Dallas. The 1961 issue of Polk's Greater Dallas City Directory was the first directory to list addresses on Greenville Avenue farther north than where Meadow Road is today. It was also the first directory to list addresses on Forest Lane between Greenville and Abrams, and there weren't many residential or business addresses listed on either of those streets. But suburban areas had been extending from Dallas since the end of the Second World War. One complex of neighborhoods had been extended northward from the area of White Rock Lake. These neighborhoods would come to be called Lake Highlands. The original neighborhood identified as Lake Highlands is south of Northwest Highway and east of the lake. Today it's called Old Lake Highlands, and it was originally laid out in 1946. By the 1950s, new Dallas neighborhoods were being developed north of Northwest Highway, and by the 1960s, these neighborhoods were approaching our area. The Richardson Independent School District established Lake Highlands High School in the early 1960s to serve the needs of these growing neighborhoods. Lake Highlands High School graduated its first class of students in 1964. At about the same time, the cities of Richardson and Garland were also extending suburban developments in the direction of the old Houcks properties. Another suburban neighborhood to be developed close by this area was Hamilton Park. In early 1953, Dallas residents passed a bond issue for the expansion of Love Field that entailed the destruction of many homes in a black neighborhood nearby. Leaders of the black community in Dallas worked to secure a new neighborhood to address the needs of the growing black middle class and professional community in the city, facing considerable opposition from civic leaders in their efforts. The Hamilton Park neighborhood was opened for development on 233 acres of land north of Forest Lane in October 1953. The neighborhood was named for Dr. Richard T. Hamilton, a physician and leader of the Dallas black community in this period. The opening of the Hamilton Park neighborhood was not only a victory for the black community in Dallas, it also turned out to be a financial success, demonstrating the need for housing for the growing black professional community in this area. By the early 1960s, a similar neighborhood was being developed nearby, just west of Greenville Avenue. This neighborhood was originally called Northwood Estates and was originally marketed to middle-class black families, though today I find it more commonly referred to as the Stoltz Road neighborhood. Between 1967 and 1984, the Dallas Cowboys practice facility was located on the north side of Forest Lane, west of Abrams Road. In the 1970s, a hotel was located next to the practice field, and the Cowboys' opposing teams were known to rent the higher floors of this hotel prior to games in Dallas, giving them scenic views, shall we say, of the Cowboys' practice field. Some businesses along Forest Lane capitalized on the Cowboys' presence, so Dallas city directories in the 1970s show Cowboy Cleaners and Cowboy Auto Parts on Forest Lane. Who wouldn't want to live near the Cowboys' practice field? Perhaps it's no coincidence that the development of the Forest Meadow, Moss Farm, and Town Creek neighborhoods began in the same year that the Cowboys' training field had come to the area. Although the first plats in the area were identified as Forest Meadow, they were east of Abrams Road in the area that's now described as Town Creek. Similarly, some of the earliest subdivisions that would become Moss Farm, the subdivisions adjacent to Whitehurst Road, were also initially labeled as parts of Forest Meadow. These subdivisions were developed in phases beginning in 1967, when the first plat identified as Forest Meadow was registered in Dallas County. Plats for subdivisions identified as Town Creek were registered beginning in 1972. In the early 1970s, these neighborhoods extended only a few streets south of Whitehurst Road, and at that point they were identified as Forest Meadow. A proposal was made to the City of Dallas to zone an extensive area south of there for the construction of apartments. This would have extended apartment developments all the way from Northwest Highway out to where Moss Farm is now located. Area residents strongly objected to these proposals and even organized a bus to carry residents to a zoning meeting where they expressed their objections. Two developments occurred as a result of this. The first was that an extensive portion of the Moss property was given to the City of Dallas as the Harry S. Moss Park, which opened in 1978. The second development was that the area immediately south of Forest Meadow was further developed for single-family residences, and this became the bulk of the Moss Farm neighborhood. The first plats identified as Moss Farm were registered in 1975. These three subdivisions continued to grow through the later 1970s and the early 1980s. As they developed, the Richardson Independent School District worked to build schools for them. Forest Meadow Junior High School was opened in a new facility in September 1970. Skyview Elementary School was also opened in 1970, and Moss Haven Elementary School was opened in the fall of 1976. Since the 1970s, neighborhood associations have grown up in each of these neighborhoods. The Town Creek Homeowner Association was established in 1976. In 1979, following a string of burglaries in Forest Meadow, residents established a neighborhood crime watch. In 1995, it was incorporated as the Forest Meadow Crime Patrol. A similar organization was formed in 1994 in the Moss Farm neighborhood, the Moss Farm Alliance Against Crime. It was only 47 years ago, when I was in the 4th grade, that this was a rural area, and the little part of it where my house is located was still in the hands of Hannah Houcks Hunt, the daughter of Nicholas T. Houcks. This is a place with a history. I believe that part of tending a place like this is to cultivate its history, to preserve the memory of those, like the Houcks family, who tended this place long before we came here. Thank you for watching.